So today we're going to go over the factors that affect plant growth. Okay, we didn't really get into that the other day when we were talking about all the hormones and stuff that plants secrete and that they use to grow and things like that. So now we'll be looking at the factors that can affect the growth of a plant, and sometimes can even influence some of the tropisms that we learned about on Thursday. Okay, that would be phototropism, okay, growth in response to light, geotropism, growth in response to gravity, okay, and thigmotropism, which is growth responses to touch. All right, so we'll be looking at some factors there, and kind of mostly common sense stuff. Okay, so we got to look at the components that affect plant growth and understand how those components can affect it. All right, so if we're looking at any basic ecosystem, okay, any basic ecosystem can be broken up into abiotic components, which are the non-living parts of an ecosystem, and the biotic components, that would be all the living parts. Okay, so the abiotic parts are very important. Obviously, they are the things that a plant requires, because actually a plant is the part of an ecosystem responsible for converting a lot of the abiotic stuff into energy for the rest of the ecosystem. So if we're looking at abiotic components, okay, we would have things like the amount of light. Okay, amount of light certainly affects plant growth. Okay, the temperature, right? How well do plants grow below freezing? Not very well. Like they don't, because water is frozen. You can't transport ice, so you're not going to be carrying out much photosynthesis during the winter months. Okay, amount of precipitation or moisture period that is available. Okay, the type of soil, the minerals. Okay, all that kind of stuff. And then looking at the biotic components. Okay, could be things like how many animals are around that eat you. Okay, so that could be if you're a plant, the herbivores, or if you're an animal, the other animals that eat you. Okay, it could also include microorganisms, okay, bacteria in the soil, okay, things like that, that would be present. So we're going to look at kind of all of those and the relationships between them, how they affect plant growth. All right, so number one factor affecting plant growth is temperature. Okay, believe it or not, even more than light. Okay, if water is frozen, plants aren't growing. Okay, now obviously temperature and light are kind of related, especially around here. Okay, as we've noticed, the days are becoming shorter and shorter and shorter. Okay, and they're only going to continue to do so for another month and a half, almost 2 months. Okay, so obviously the amount of light influences our temperature as well. Okay, but obviously it's important because plants are not an organism that can regulate their body temperature. In fact, very few organisms are capable of regulating their body temperature to a reasonable extent. Okay, obviously mostly mammals and birds, okay, would be the ones that would be able to do that, whereas basically everything else can't. Okay, so we have to worry about if water freezes within the plant cells, it will expand, it will crystallize. The crystals are sharp. Those things will puncture tonoplasts. That's the membrane around the water vacuole. They will puncture the cell membrane, the cell wall. Okay, all of that, and essentially then after that, the contents of the cell will leak out. Okay, once the temperature gets above freezing again. So we can't have that. Okay, enzymes are another thing. Okay, enzymes are proteins that organisms produce, and they do certain jobs within the body. Most enzymes have a narrow temperature range in which they work, especially in mammals. Okay, obviously in plants it's a little wider, but okay, in mammals there's a very narrow range over which our enzymes work. Right? For us, our normal body temperature being around 37 degrees, our enzymes work ideally, okay, between about 35 and 38 and a half. Okay, outside of that range, they work okay. Out the extreme ends, they don't work at all. All right, which is why when you start to run a fever, you get really weak. Okay, when you run a fever and your body temperature goes above about 38 and a half, 39 degrees, okay, your enzymes denature. That is, proteins begin to break down and change shape. The way an enzyme works is dependent on its shape. So when these proteins denature and change shape, they don't do their job anymore. Okay, that's what makes you feel weak, and that's why running a high fever for a long period of time is really unhealthy. Okay, it can lead to all kinds of health problems, even death, if it gets too high for too long. Okay, so we always want to try and bring fevers down if at all possible. Same for hypothermia. Okay, if you are too cold, okay, anyone ever had like really bad hypothermia? Okay, like really bad hypothermia, like you start to get, again, kind of sleepy, you don't reason very well. In fact, I've seen a person who had hypothermia so bad, I thought initially they were just blind drunk. Okay, they were making no sense. They were slurring their speech. They had all the symptoms of being intoxicated. And then I grabbed their hand and it was ice cold. I touched their face, cold to the touch. Okay. So it's when your enzymes begin to break down, you just don't function properly. And the same is for plants. Okay. If they get too hot, then they're going to shut down. Okay. If they get too cold, they're going to shut down because their enzymes aren't working. Okay. All right, and then water. Okay, obviously plants require water. It's part of the ingredients for photosynthesis, so they need to be able to access it, but it varies drastically between habitats, which is also why plants vary drastically between habitats. You don't see saguaro cactus growing in the tropical rainforest. Okay, it's not adapted to that. Okay, it's too wet. Have anyone ever like had a cactus, like the little ones at home, right? Like I kill those constantly. Okay, I don't kill plants that need water. Okay, they get sick, but then the cue is, oh, I gotta water them. I kill cactus all the time because I always overwater it. Okay, it's like, ooh, I wonder if I should water it. I give a little bit of water, and then the next day I come over, it's like moldy. Okay, so you have these adaptations. Okay, plants can save water. They can use lots of water. It depends on where they live, but obviously there has to be some water for plants to grow. Okay, sunlight. Obviously, sunlight's important. It's another one of the ingredients in photosynthesis, okay? But it's not just as an energy source. Light cues a lot of behaviors, not only in plants, but also in animals, okay? Length of day, as you move away from the equator, is the most reliable cue for seasonal change, temperature change, and things like that. Yes, sure, we can get a cold snap in May, or we can get a cold snap in September, right? But in all likelihood, it's not going to get cold for a long time, okay, until the days start to get really short, right? That's why all the geese are practicing right now. Okay, if you ever look up in the sky, like always in like October, the geese are like flying in circles and flying. Looks like they're flying the wrong way. They're just getting in shape. They got to work out for the big fly south. Okay, so they practice a bit and then they go. But the reason they go is because the days are getting shorter. Okay, the reason that plants go dormant and lose their leaves, days are getting shorter, right? The reason that animals have their mating cycles at certain times of the year has to do again with length of day, right? Especially for mammals. They don't want to be having their young in the dead of winter because it's very likely that they will freeze to death or starve. Okay, because there's not enough food around. Okay, for the mom to provide milk and things like that. So they need to cue all of this stuff based on length of day. Okay, so their times when they mate are usually, like, especially for like deer and stuff like that, would be in the fall. Okay, then they are kind of pregnant through the winter, and they give birth in the early spring or late spring when there's going to be lots of grass to eat, et cetera, et cetera. All right, everybody okay with that idea? Okay, so light's very important in that regard, but obviously it's also the main light source, or the main energy source, sorry, for all ecosystems. Okay, wind. Here's one that people don't often think of, but wind is a major factor that affects plant growth. Okay, and if you go like down into southern Alberta, you see this. It's very evident in the shapes of trees. Okay, when you go down to southern Alberta, trees all grow to the east. Why? It blows them that way, but it also tends to break off branches on the western side, okay, or what we call the windward side. So they tend to have more foliage on the eastern side. Okay, in high mountain passes where wind, especially in the wintertime, will whistle through the pass, but only in one direction, you will see oftentimes like Douglas fir and Engelmann spruce, they will grow in what's called a Crummel's form. You see how you can see like all the branches and the bare trunk on this one? Okay, so if you looked at it from the top, okay, here's the trunk. You only have branches in that sector because the trunk provides a wind shadow for those branches. If you have a branch growing out this way in the wintertime when the icy winds are blowing, okay, they're blowing ice crystals and stuff like that, it's gonna be like a sandblaster. It's just gonna strip the needles off, okay, break the branches, whatever. Okay, so they tend to grow them like this, and then they actually curl a bit as well. So a true Crummel spruce tree grows like this, and the branches are all in there. It almost looks like the fiddlehead of a fern. Okay, so they just grow dwarfed and actually bent over, okay, in order to protect themselves from the wind. The other good advantage of this, especially for spruce trees, is that snow will then collect in this area and cause a drift to form around the tree, just like a snow fence. Okay? And eventually what that does is it covers up the tree with snow and protects it from further wind and insulates it against the cold, because snow is such a good insulator. So you'll often see trees that'll grow like this because they essentially become a natural snow fence. Okay? And they'll collect the snow and allow it to drift around them. Okay? The other problem with wind is it amplifies the effects of evaporation. Okay? I mean, your hair dryer, if you use a hair dryer at home, okay, isn't just a heat source, it's also a big fan. Because if you just had the heat source on, it wouldn't dry your hair nearly as fast. Okay? We want to blow the air past the hair because that increases the rate of evaporation. So when it's hot and windy, it's going to dry out faster. Okay? And so wind amplifies the effects of evaporation, and that can also lead to this. It won't be long before we'll be hearing that every morning. Okay? It's this cold, but with the wind chill, it's ridiculous. Okay? Yeah, you know, like it's -30, but it's -50 with the wind chill. It's horrible. Okay? What wind chill is the amplification of the effect of cold. Okay? When water evaporates off of your body, it takes energy from your body to do it, which makes you feel colder. All right, so if you have exposed skin, as water evaporates from that exposed skin, it makes your skin feel even colder than it actually is. Okay, and that amplifies the effects of the cold outside. Okay, and plants are not immune to that either. Okay, plants have the same problem. Okay, making sense? All right, so wind can also be a factor in thigmotropism, right? That's that whole Crummel's thing we looked at. Okay, so wind is essentially like a touch source, okay, for a plant that teaches it which way to grow or influences which way it will grow, okay, as a result. So thigmotropism could be a factor there. Okay, rocks and soil. Is dirt the same everywhere you go? No, dirt's very different everywhere you go. All right, around here, okay, in Okotoks, we have a lot. Our soil is really gritty. Okay, it's kind of a lighter brown and it's really gritty. It's full of sand. Why? What's the bedrock here made out of? Sandstone. Yeah. Okay. You go anywhere in town where there's an exposed outcropping of rock, it's sandstone. All right. Before we moved, the house we had, they pulled chunks of sandstone out of the hole when they built it for the basement that were the size of a Volkswagen. Okay, they just kept pulling these big pieces of sandstone out because we were built right on a sandstone outcropping. Okay, there's sandstone everywhere, and the weathering of bedrock is what produces soil. So around here, our soils are going to be heavily sand-based because the rocks that they eroded from have lots of sand in them. Okay? If you go further north, like let's say north of Red Deer, okay, you see a pretty major change in the type of soil. It becomes much darker and much finer because there's more limestone. Okay, it changes the bedrock, so we change the type of soil that we see. All right, you go into the mountains, same thing. Okay, you're going to see more of the kind of not silty but fine-grained soil because again, there's more limestone than there is sandstone. Again, depending on where you are. But that's going to change the type of soil. This soil here, okay, you can see all these rocks around. These are all limestone. Okay, and so the soil is quite dark but quite fine, and it's also not very deep. Okay, when I took this picture and I pushed the trowel in, I actually had to set a rock behind it that you can't see to stand it up because I couldn't jam it into the ground any further than that. Okay, because I hit the rock right away. So how old and thick is this soil? Not very. Okay, the soil is very young. It hasn't had a lot of chance to erode because it's at a very high altitude. Okay, and so the glaciers recently geologically have just receded. Okay, and so it hasn't been exposed to weathering and stuff for very long. Whereas down here, the glaciers have been gone for much longer. Okay, so we have much thicker soil here. Everybody all right with that idea? Okay, so rocks and soil can influence the nutrients and minerals that are available in the soil. Okay, they can also influence just how much soil there is. Okay, and obviously how well it retains water. If you around here, our soils dry out fairly quickly because they're very sandy, very gritty. If you go to let's say Drumheller, for example, and people have been to Drumheller. Okay, like you got the badlands there, all the hoodoos and everything. Okay, the soil's really fine there because it's eroding that clayish stuff. It's really silty. Okay, that stuff retains moisture really well. Okay, like the surface may get dry and cracked, but right under the surface it'll still be wet. Okay, because it's got a lot of clay in it, and clay retains moisture much better than do sandy soils like we have here. Okay, another abiotic component we don't often think about: periodic disturbances. Okay, every once in a while, an ecosystem undergoes some sort of catastrophic change. Okay, that could be like a fire. Okay, we've had a lot of those the last few summers. Okay, that changes the resources that are available. Obviously, it kills off all the trees that are there at that particular time. But what does it do for the undergrowth? Yeah, it allows more light through to them, and also because all the standing trees are dead, they're no longer taking any nutrients and moisture from the soil. Okay, so younger plants now have a chance to get a foothold, okay, and kind of rejuvenate the forest, right? Part of the reason, guys, that we're getting so many fires around here every summer, I mean, yes, it's been drier, although this summer wasn't terrible. Last summer it was really bad, okay, is because our forests are all very old. Okay, these are very old growth forests, and there's a lot of standing deadfall. Okay, that just means there's a lot of vegetation that's old and sick or already dead. Okay, and that's dry and that's fuel. Okay, so there's just a lot of fuel. We're naturally going to get lots of forest fires for probably the next while. Okay, the next few years will probably be bad for forest fires just because, well, there's lots of fuel around. Okay, once they burn, okay, then we'll get smaller, like deciduous trees growing first. Okay, that whole process of succession will happen. Okay, and then we'll see changes in the ecosystem. Okay, but a periodic disturbance isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? When people say, "Oh no, forest fires are terrible," I mean, I'm not saying that people losing their homes and stuff isn't terrible. I'm not saying that. Okay, but it's important for an ecosystem to go through those changes because we need to change what kind of organisms are there, right? If we've just got a bunch of old dead trees, is there much food around for like deer and moose and elk? Right? So we got to have these periodic disturbances to make sure that we've got changes that are healthy in the ecosystem to keep it running. Okay? Forest fire is one that we're familiar with. A hurricane can also be one. Okay, when a hurricane comes through, it'll blow down anything that's old and sick and some things that aren't. Okay, but it also brings in like the storm surge, so you get like a bunch of water coming in from the ocean, which deposits more minerals in the soil. Okay, things like that. Flooding. Okay, flooding is a periodic disturbance. It's important because it helps to strip away stuff that would be on, let's say, like the floodplain. Okay, and it brings in nutrients and stuff. I mean, we remember in 2013 what that was like, right? That flood water was just like chocolate milk. Okay, it was full of silt. Okay, and did anyone help out cleaning? Okay, like everywhere was just that mud, right? Just that really fine silty mud. Okay, well that's full of nutrients. If that just gets deposited on a floodplain, okay, it helps to increase the fertility of the soil. Obviously, it sucks when it's in your basement. Okay, it's not supposed to be there, but it is full of nutrients and things like that that are good for helping stuff to grow on the floodplain. So these periodic disturbances are important in a natural system. Okay. All right, even a volcanic eruption, that can be a periodic disturbance depending on the type. Obviously, ones like they have in Hawaii, where like molten rock comes out of the volcano and like then hardens, that's a sterilization event. Okay, like it's going to take thousands and thousands of years for that area to recover. Okay, but if you have one that's more ash based, okay, as that ash falls, the ash is really good for soil. Right, which is why like places in Italy and Greece can grow like grapes and olives and stuff like that, very nutrient demanding stuff, because they're growing it in volcanic soil. Okay? And the volcanic soil is really rich in nutrients. Okay, now biological, okay, the biotic components. That was all the abiotic components. Okay, organisms in an ecosystem interact more than just who eats who. Okay, lots of organisms have a role beyond being food for something else. Okay, if we're looking at all the little tiny insects and things like that that live in the soil, right? They're important for not only like turning the soil, okay, like as they burrow through it, they turn the soil. Their feces helps to fertilize the soil, okay, but they also help with a lot of the nutrient cycles. Okay, they're eating some of the stuff that's in the soil, okay, etc. Even things like fungi, okay, fungi are important. Okay? They help to decompose stuff and get the nutrients cycled through quicker. Okay, carpenter ants. Okay, anyone ever seen those? They are nasty. Okay, and they bite hard, and there's always more than one of them, like hundreds of them. Okay, but you'll find them inside of old kind of rotting trees. Okay, you have to be careful of that. If you're the guy running the chainsaw, you have to be really careful. Okay, because if you get through the middle of the tree and you get into the nest, where does the chainsaw throw them all? On you. I speak from experience. It sucks. Okay, cutting down a tree when I worked at the golf course, and I went right into the middle of this massive carpenter ant nest in the middle of the tree and sprayed them all over me. I was wearing shorts. It was, oh, yeah, okay, it's terrible. They bite really hard. What's that? I was wearing shorts while I was using a chainsaw. Yes, I know. Well, back is a long time ago. Workplace health and safety wasn't as big a deal then. I was wearing goggles though. None of them got in my eyes. So, okay. So yeah, we got all those kinds of things. They are decomposers. Okay, they're helping to increase the surface area that's available for decomposition. That'll help it to go faster. Okay, but all of those kinds of organisms are important, right down to the soil bacteria. Okay, the soil bacteria, some of them are taking nitrogen out of the air and turning it into nitrates and ammonia and stuff like that that the plants can use. Okay, now this part isn't in your notes, I don't think, but okay, this is just looking again at the parts of the plant here. Okay, if we're looking at like this is the stem, okay, of a plant, of a very small plant under the microscope. Okay, we got the epidermis here on the outside. Okay, and you got the cortex. Okay, the cortex is just like cells. Okay, and then you have the vascular cylinder. So okay, we would have like phloem kind of in this part here in the cortex part, and then the vascular cylinder here. Okay, would contain some of the xylem. Okay, in the middle here. All right. Most of the absorption for water is coming at the tips of the roots. Okay, so if you're seeing like a big tree and it's got like the big kind of woody, hard roots that are going everywhere, the woody roots are not absorbing water. They're old. Okay, they were the tip of the root when the plant was small. Right now, what they're doing is they're just extending out the tips of the roots to other places, and they're acting more as an anchor than they are anything else. Okay, so the tips of the roots are the ones responsible for taking up most of the water, which is why something like a carrot or a beet has those tiny little root hairs coming off of it. Okay, those are the parts of it that have the high surface area to volume ratio that we talked about last week. Okay, they're the ones that are able to absorb more of the moisture and nutrients. Okay, and then this is not something you guys will need to know, but there's two ways a plant can get water through its roots. Okay, there's the fast way and the slow way. Okay, so we have the first part here, which is called the symplastic route. Okay, and that means that it goes through. It actually goes through the cell membranes and cell walls. Okay, before moving into the xylem tubes. The advantage of this way is that because it has to go through a bunch of cell membranes, it essentially filters it. And takes out any toxins and things like that. That's what a plant would use if it's not stressed. If a plant is stressed for water and needs to take it up quickly, then it will use the apoplastic route, which means water passes between all of the cells, doesn't get filtered, okay? And as a result is taken up more quickly, but there's more of a danger of absorbing toxins. Okay, and we already talked about that, so we'll skip that and that. All right. Essentially two groups that plants can fit into, okay? The hydrophytes and the xerophytes, okay? Phytes, the prefix phyte means the same as phile or philic, means to love something, okay? So if you are a hydrophyte or a hydrophile, you love water. No, I hesitate to say that, but yes, you'll always remember it. A pedophile loves children. Yeah, okay, yeah. Phile is a suffix that means loving. Okay, so hydrophiles or hydrophytes love water, so they would grow in places that are flooded, saturated all the time. Okay, they can tolerate being submerged even. So if you've been to the mangroves and stuff like that in Florida, okay, those are hydrophytes. Okay, they can tolerate being flooded, for months at a time. Okay. These plants here, I took a picture of these in Hawaii. They were growing in a very tropical rainforest part of Hawaii. Okay, and they actually have two different kinds of roots. They've got these roots here, which are just like they're anchors. Okay, they hold the tree down, but they can also absorb water out of the soil. Okay, they were exposed because a flood had gone through here and washed away a lot of the soil. Okay, and then there's these roots up here. Okay, these ones that look like they're coming out of the tree about halfway up. Okay, if I was standing next to this tree, I would only come up to about here as a matter of perspective. Okay, the tour guide was explaining how these work, and he said, we call these the snorkels because they allow the plant to get oxygen to its roots even if they're submerged. Okay, around here, if our plants have their roots submerged for more than a few days, they'll suffocate. Okay, their roots will suffocate. They won't be able to carry out cellular respiration because they can't absorb oxygen from the air spaces in the soil, okay, because the soil becomes saturated. These plants, their roots are submerged and saturated for much of the year, so they have these snorkel roots that absorb oxygen out of the air and can pipe it down to the roots. Okay, so it's an adaptation for living in a flooded environment. Okay, lilies, okay, they essentially have a root that goes all the way down to the bottom of the lake or whatever, okay, but they actually absorb oxygen through their leaves. Okay. Okay, and the opposite of that would be your xerophytes. Okay, xero means dry. Okay, so these things love the dry. So they're adapted to arid climates. Okay, they have various leaf modifications. Cacti, for example, their leaves are so modified they don't even carry out photosynthesis anymore. They're the thorns. Okay, other xerophytic plants, okay, are called succulents. That is, their leaves are very, very thick and like hard. They have a very thick, hard, waxy cuticle, okay, that protects them from evaporation and makes them harder to eat. Okay, the whole adaptation of thorns really kept animals from grazing on these plants, because if you're a cactus and you get punctured, is that an area where water can evaporate? Yeah, and a lot of water can evaporate through that. Okay, I mean, cacti can heal if they have a puncture, but if it's too big, then it'll kill them. Right? You'll often see birds will nest inside of cacti, but those cacti often look sick or are already dead, okay, because they've burrowed out a hole. Okay? And they actually can eat the inside of the cactus as well when they do that. Okay, but obviously it's going to allow stuff to evaporate. Now, people also get the wrong idea about how a cacti works. People are like, oh yeah, if I'm dying of thirst in the desert, I'll just punch a hole in a cactus and like water will come out of it. No, it's not a cooler. Okay, there's not a big reservoir of water inside. It's a succulent, which means its flesh is very full of water. So if you're gonna get water from a cactus, you essentially have to cut chunks of the tissue out and suck the water out of it, and most of them don't taste very good. They're quite bitter, to discourage exactly that, to discourage animals from using them as a source of water and food. Okay, birds apparently it doesn't bother them as much. Okay, but most animals will stay away because A, they don't want to get thorns, and B, they don't taste very good. Right? Exceptions to that would be the prickly pear cactus, okay, which grows around here, okay, and further south of here, like around Lethbridge, you'll see the prickly pear. Antelope will eat that. Okay, an antelope may never drink water in its life. Its kidney is so efficient that it can actually live off the moisture in some of the stuff it eats. Okay, not to say that if it didn't come across a lake, it wouldn't drink, but okay, but they can eat cacti. Their tongue and the inside of their mouth is like shoe leather. Okay, it's like really hard, and so they can just chomp right down on the prickly pear and not get the thorns going through their cheeks. Okay, so they can actually just eat it. You or I would have to cut it open. Okay, and the prickly pear cactus actually doesn't taste all that bad if you eat it. So. They'll eat the small ones, right? Yeah, yeah. Okay, so during the driest months, desert plants, if they have leaves, will lose their leaves, okay? And others like cacti will subsist on water stored in their fleshy stems, okay? So some plants will use this CAM method of photosynthesis, which we didn't have to know, but it was that other leaf structure, okay? That helps them to conserve water. And they do all of the water evaporating parts of photosynthesis at night. Okay, that's what a CAM plant does, is it separates what we call the light reactions from the dark reactions. The Calvin cycle is the dark reactions, and that's the part where sugar gets made, and it's where water has to evaporate. But the energy absorbing part doesn't require water to evaporate. So they do that part during the day, and then they do the other part at night. Okay, that's it for that one. Okay. I'm going to give you guys a couple of minutes here because I want you to work a little bit more. I don't have the Chromebooks, but I want you to work a little bit more on your analysis for your plant lab, okay, while I get the next thing ready here. Okay, so you got a couple more minutes. So you can pull out your phone, you can do that.